The prison lights flickered once and then again, and that's when the German shepherd growled, not at the inmate in chains, but at the warden standing behind him. In that split second, every guard in the room stiffened, their hands inching toward. Tasers and pistols. The inmate, Marcus Kane, didn't flinch, he didn't even blink. He just sat there on the wooden chair, wrists cuffed to a steel chain bolted into the floor, staring straight into the dog's eyes. Then he whispered, "You know, don't you, boy?" The K9, Zeus, snapped his gaze toward Marcus with an intensity that could cut through bone. His chest heaved, tail stiff, ears locked forward like a soldier detecting a silent command. But the tension wasn't between man and dog. It was the man behind them, the warden, the one holding the final signature for the lethal injection. "Call the damn dog off," he barked. "He's unstable." But Zeus didn't budge. Instead, he stepped forward. The room collapsed into slow motion. The clink of chains echoed. Marcus's breath caught in his throat and the guards reached for their weapons, just as Zeus lunged, but not at Marcus. Zeus launched himself at the warden, fangs bared, a snarl that could shake the concrete walls, and, in that moment the lie unraveled. Everyone thought Marcus was the criminal, but the dog, he remembered everything. 3 years earlier, Marcus Kane wasn't wearing orange. He was wearing blue, navy blue. The kind of blue that came with a badge, a Kevlar vest, and a reputation. Sergeant Marcus Kane was one of the most decorated K9 handlers in the state, a man of precision, loyalty, and grit. He never missed a detail until the night that changed everything. That night had a fog to it, not just in the air, but in his memory. It started with a call, a warehouse break-in on the edge of town. Zeus had picked up the trail of a suspect. The chase was clean, the perimeter was tight. But when they reached the back office, the suspect was already down, blood pooling, his hand still warm around a Glock. The problem? There was no body cam footage, and when backup arrived, all they saw was Marcus holding the weapon, and Zeus barking over the body like something was wrong. Within days, Marcus was arrested. The evidence was clean, but too clean. The prints on the gun, the boot marks near the body, the missing logs from dispatch. It was orchestrated. But no one wanted to hear that. No one wanted to believe a cop could be framed, especially not by someone within the system. His silence in court was deliberate, not weakness, strategy. Because the only one who could prove the truth wasn't human. It was Zeus, and they took him away before he could. For 3 years, Marcus sat behind concrete and steel, wondering where Zeus was, if he'd been sold, retired, or, worse, the dog had seen what really happened. And Marcus prayed every night that somehow someone would listen to a story only a dog could tell. Now, just 4 days before his scheduled execution, a letter arrived. No return address, no name, just one line typed in red, "Your dog remembers," and underneath it, a visitation approval form. For Zeus. The guards thought it was a joke. The warden laughed when he signed it, but Marcus didn't smile once. He knew what Zeus was capable of. He knew what that dog saw, and if they were bringing him back now, something was about to happen great. Here comes the high-stakes heart of the story. The visiting room had been cleared. No reporters, no other inmates, just cameras, dozens of others, mounted high in the corners like vultures waiting for the fall. Marcus sat shackled at the ankles, hands bound at the waist, but his eyes? Alive, sharper than they'd been in years. The moment the side door clicked open and paws echoed against the concrete floor, time seemed to halt. Zeus entered slowly, led by a junior handler who looked like he had no clue who he was dealing with. The shepherd's ears were perked, his tail stiff, not wagging. He didn't look like he was greeting his old partner. He looked like he was assessing a crime scene. The handler tried to tug his leash. "Go on, boy, that's your old buddy." But Zeus stood frozen, his eyes locked onto Marcus like he was scanning for permission. Marcus leaned forward. "You remember me, don't you?" That was all it took. Zeus surged forward, not in aggression, but with the precision of a soldier reuniting with his commanding officer. He pressed his head into Marcus's chest, breathing heavily, not barking, not whining, just waiting. The moment burned through the guards watching on the other side of the glass, but one man didn't flinch. Warden Halbridge. His jaw clenched, as Zeus raised his eyes to him again and let out a low growl, barely audible but loaded with meaning. Back in Marcus's cell, everything changed. Guards who had ignored him for years now stared through the bars with curiosity. One even muttered, "He really trained that dog, huh?" But Marcus wasn't celebrating. He knew what this was. A setup. They didn't bring Zeus for a reunion. They brought him to control the narrative, to break the man down before death by parading his one emotional weakness in front of him, but they underestimated something vital. Dogs never forget. That night, Zeus didn't sleep on the kennel mat in the warden's office like they instructed. He barked, he howled, he scratched at the window, even slammed his body against the steel door, like he was trying to get out, get back, get to Marcus. And then something strange happened. He stopped. Completely. At 3:47 a.m., Zeus lay perfectly still, ears erect, eyes watching something, or someone, outside his kennel. The next morning, the assistant warden, a quiet man named Keller, who barely spoke at staff meetings, found a torn piece of paper inside Marcus's cell, tucked into a roll of toilet paper. One line, scratched in jagged, hurried handwriting. Zeus is trying to speak. Watch his eyes when Halbridge enters. 2 days later, during what was supposed to be Marcus's final psychological evaluation, Warden Halbridge personally stepped into the observation room, bringing Zeus with him. "I figured," he said smugly. "The dog might keep him calm. Or tear him apart if he acts out. Either way, win-win." But Marcus didn't rise to the bait. He sat still. And when Zeus entered, he watched not the dog, but the warden. This time, Zeus didn't go to Marcus. He stood in the middle, looking from one man to the other, and then he did something that shocked even the guards. He barked, once. He turned toward the corner of the room, toward the ventilation shaft. He pawed at it, then looked back at Marcus. And then he barked again. It wasn't random. It was a code Marcus had taught him years ago during drug bust training. One bark, chum alert, paw once. Presence of a concealed object. Second bark, threat level confirmed. Zeus was trying to point to something hidden. The warden laughed it off. "Cute. Looks like the old mutt's finally cracked." But Marcus smiled for the first time in years, because Zeus wasn't cracking, he was witnessing. That night, Marcus was moved to death watch. 24 hours. They put him in the red zone, steel door, bulletproof glass, single guard on rotation. But the guard that night wasn't random. It was Keller, the same assistant warden who'd found the note. He entered the room without a word and slipped something under Marcus's food tray. A flash drive. No label. Just a sticky note that said, "Zeus led us to it." "There's audio, you were right." Marcus didn't breathe for 10 seconds. He stared at the drive like it was burning. "Keller," he said, voice shaking. "Why?" The man didn't answer. He just walked out, locking the door behind him. But as he left, Marcus saw him wipe his eye like someone finally cracking under the weight of silence. The next morning, the press arrived early. Word had leaked that Marcus Kane's K9 had gone berserk. Some said he attacked a staff member. Others claimed he scratched out a message on the walls of his cell. But none of that mattered, because as the state prepped for execution, a new legal motion hit the prison's internal server, emergency stay of execution. Attached evidence, audio recording. Zeus had scratched up the inside of the warden's private office wall, leading to a hidden compartment behind a false vent. Inside was a wire recorder, old tech, analog, meant to never be found. But Zeus remembered that night 3 years ago. He'd been trained not just to chase suspects, but to detect tech, microphones, surveillance tools. He'd never stopped trying to lead someone there. And the audio? It had everything. A voice. The warden's, clear as glass. Frame him, kill the dealer, plant the piece. That dog's the only risk. Get him reassigned. Make sure Kane rots. The media storm hit like a tsunami. By noon, the prison's front gates were swarmed with reporters. shouting questions and flashing headlines on their phones. Wrongfully convicted cop gets last-minute reprieve. Hero K9 exposes corrupt warden in shocking twist. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Kane wasn't just an inmate. He was a symbol of injustice, of loyalty, of truth with fur and fangs. In the control tower, someone quietly replaced the red execution tag with a yellow one, in review. But inside Marcus's cell, he didn't celebrate. He just sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, Zeus beside him, resting his head on Marcus's thigh. "You saved me again," Marcus whispered, brushing the dog's ear. "Just like you always." Tony Zeus's tail thumped faintly. The guards were different now. Some nodded as they walked past. Others looked down in guilt. Even Warden Hallbridge hadn't been seen since morning. Rumors flew. He'd resigned, fled, even been arrested. A lawyer came by, buzzing with adrenaline, promising appeals and interviews and compensation packages. He spoke of early release and lawsuits. And Marcus? He nodded, but he didn't believe a word, because something still felt wrong. Why now? Why bring Zeus back just days before his execution? Why would the warden leave evidence behind that could burn him alive? Unless he didn't know it was there. At 3:13 p.m., Marcus was moved out of death watch and taken to a transition block pending release orders. He walked freely, no chains, Zeus at his side. Every step felt unreal. As he passed through the final checkpoint into the administrative wing, one of the guards clapped him on the shoulder. "It's over, Kane." But Marcus didn't smile, because in the pit of his stomach something was screaming, "It's not over." 20 minutes later, he was led into an administrative room for final clearance. The moment the door closed, he knew. The smell of bleach. The too-quiet hallway, no windows, a single chair, and standing in the corner, arms crossed, Warden Hallbridge, still in uniform, still smiling. "You almost had it, Kane," he said calmly. "Almost." Marcus didn't move. The audio, "We'll never reach the court. You know how easy it is to erase a file. You think Keller walked out of here with it?" No, that was bait. The real show ends right here. From behind Hallbridge, 2 guards entered, armed. But Zeus? He didn't bark. He growled and advanced. "Call him off," Hallbridge snapped, but Marcus didn't. "Zeus," he whispered. "Circle 9. The guards froze. Hallbridge blinked. It was a code Marcus had never used before, a last resort protocol. Zeus. Launched, but not at the guards. He leapt onto the table, slammed his paw on a metal file box, and triggered the hidden body cam Marcus had seen installed during intake. Recording. Streaming. Live. To an encrypted drive Keller had wired to his watch. "Smile," Marcus said coldly. "You just confessed." They dragged Marcus out of the room. Hallbridge's mask had cracked. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He just whispered to the guards, "Take him to the deep hold. He's not walking out of here again." Marcus didn't resist. He couldn't. His wrists bled from the cuffs. His knees buckled from the blow one of the guards had delivered to his gut on the way down. The concrete beneath him felt colder than ever, but worse than the pain was the silence. Zeus wasn't there. They'd separated them again. The black site beneath the prison wasn't on any official blueprint. No lights, no cameras, no sound except dripping water and your own breath echoing back at you. They left him there. No food, no voice, no answer. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. Hopelessness. "They'll bury me down here," he thought. This wasn't a victory, it was bait. He let that file surface just to see who would help me. Now he'll silence every one of them. And Zeus, if they hurt him... He stopped. He couldn't go further. The tears came fast and hard, not for himself, but for his partner, his brother, his K9. He had trained Zeus to face bullets. He had watched him drag men twice his size through alleyways and burn zones. But what good was all of that now, against human cruelty, against a system that eats its own? "I should have let them kill me," he whispered, voice breaking. At least he'd be safe. At least it would have ended with him beside me. He pressed his head to the floor, waiting for the last breath. Then 3 thumps, heavy, metal against metal, from outside the cell. He didn't move. Thought it was his mind cracking, then a fourth thump, and a low, familiar growl. Marcus jolted upright, banging his head against the wall. He whispered into the dark, "Zeus!" Nothing. Then, faintly, barely audible, a scraping sound, the kind paws make against rusted steel. Marcus crawled to the door, bloodied and bruised, and pressed his ear to the floor. He was there. Zeus, outside the chamber, waiting, refusing to leave. The guard who tried to separate them had made a mistake. So Zeus had broken free, somehow, someway, and instead of escaping, he'd followed Marcus into hell. In that moment, something changed inside him. Marcus's broken breath turned into a rasped laugh. Not madness, defiance. "You came back," he whispered, pressing both palms to the door. "You damn stubborn mutt!" And as his fingers touched cold iron, a memory hit him. Years ago, training Zeus for one final skill Marcus never got to finish. A contingency. One last command. "If they take me somewhere dark, and you can't find me, find the light. Lead them to me." It wasn't a command Zeus had ever needed until now, and somehow he remembered. Marcus stood, limping to the back wall, using what strength he had left to carve one word into the concrete with his handcuff pin. Light. 2 hours later, Zeus wasn't alone outside that door. There were voices, orders being shouted, radios crackling, and then a single gunshot. Marcus flinched, heart lurching. Another silence, then the creak of the heavy bolts sliding back. The door opened, and standing in the light, squinting against the pitch-black cell, was Detective Lena Harrow, blood on her sleeve, Zeus at her side. "He led us here," she said breathlessly. "He scratched at every damn door in this wing until we heard the echo. I thought he was going insane." Marcus collapsed into her arms. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Hours earlier. After Keller's body cam went dark, Halbridge had issued a silent lockdown on the admin wing. But he hadn't expected one thing. Zeus had been trained to memorize Keller's scent. While Marcus was being dragged to the deep hold, Zeus had broken free of his handler, ignoring every shouted command, and tracked Keller's blood and sweat all the way to the prison's garage lot, where the car was gone and the camera was still live, streaming from Keller's unconscious body to Lena's laptop. At the precinct, she watched the footage Keller had sent, the full confession. Halbridge's smirk. His words, "You almost had it, Kane." The moment Zeus activated the hidden recorder, the guards, the threats, everything. Lena stood up in a silent room filled with stunned officers. "We're going in." What followed was chaos. A judge ordered an emergency writ. The governor was briefed. An internal task force stormed Blackridge Penitentiary at 2 a.m., but Halbridge had wiped most of the records. They couldn't find Marcus. No logs. No cell entries, nothing. But Zeus knew. They let him lead. His growl turned into frantic barking at the northeast sub-basement. There, behind a sealed wall, they found Marcus, barely conscious, but alive. Marcus sat in a medical room, an IV in his eye. Arm Zeus curled at his feet. Across the table sat a federal prosecutor. Hands shaking. "We have everything now. The confessions, the audio, the documents Keller hid in the intake camera were encrypted. But Zeus's behavior led us straight to the hardware." She looked up. "You're not just exonerated, Mr. Kane. Beat. You've become the key witness in one of the largest prison corruption scandals in U.S. history." But Marcus didn't celebrate. He just looked down at Zeus and asked the question that haunted him through all the pain. Why bring him back at all? Why would Halbridge approve the request to let a prisoner on death row see his canine dog, especially when that dog held the key to everything? The prosecutor frowned. Halbridge didn't approve that request. Marcus blinked. What? She leaned in. The request was digitally logged under the warden's name, but the routing and timestamps, well, let's just say it wasn't him. Marcus's heart dropped. Then who? She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printed note from the prison database, a formal last request form, filed by someone using a retired badge number. Detective Thomas Kane, Marcus's father, dead. For 6 years, Thomas Kane had once worked in Blackridge before retiring. He had uncovered signs of corruption in his last year, but died before he could act. Unknown to everyone, he'd hidden an encrypted override code inside the prison's internal system, attached to an old K9 deployment protocol. If Zeus ever re-entered the facility and matched biometric patterns tied to Marcus, the system would automatically flag his presence as an active key and grant one request: a visit, not for compassion, but for exposure. "You trained me to follow light in darkness," Marcus whispered, stroking Zeus's fur. "You and Dad, both." Halbridge was arrested on sight. The guards who aided him were indicted, and Marcus, he walked out of the prison a free man, Zeus beside him. A sea of reporters waited outside the gates, but Marcus didn't look at them. He looked straight up at the sky, no words, no speeches, just silence, and a hand on his partner's head. As he reached the bottom steps, Zeus paused, looked back. Behind them, a single guard, rookie, young, uncertain, stood in the shadows, watching. Marcus locked eyes with him. Something about the way he looked, how still he was, how familiar. Then the man smiled, just slightly, and said, "Not all shadows go away in the light." Then turned and vanished into the crowd. Here it comes. The final twist, the moment that redefines everything. Marcus couldn't sleep, not even after freedom, not even after Zeus, sprawled at the foot of his bed, let out deep, content breaths. Too much had happened. Too much was still wrong. He sat at his desk, thumbing through old case files he had fought to reclaim, documents from his undercover work, ones he barely remembered until now. And then something caught his eye, a photograph, a surveillance still from a bust 6 years ago, a group of suspects being led out of a warehouse, one man, hood pulled. Lo! His eyes locked onto the camera, the same smile. The rookie from outside the prison gate. Marcus stood slowly, breath catching. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." He checked the badge log, pulled up the prison's entry records from the night of his rescue. There it was, an unauthorized entry. Name, Samuel Harrow. Badge, stolen. No rank, no history, no record. He looked over at Zeus, who now stirred, ears up. The dog let out a low growl, not at Marcus but at the window. Marcus turned. Outside in the alley beneath the flickering street lamp, that same man stood, staring up, smile still on his face, and then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand and made the same two-finger whistle Marcus had used to command Zeus in combat. Zeus shot upright, then darkness, the power cut, the street lamp. Exploded. Marcus rushed to the window, but the alley was empty. Not even footprints, just the distant echoing sound of a dog whistle that only Zeus could hear. One final question remains. Who called Zeus that night, and why did he obey? The sound of a distant whistle never fully left Marcus's mind. Even weeks later, free, clean, healed, he still heard it sometimes in the quiet, like a thread pulled too tight in the fabric. Of his thoughts. It haunted him, not as a scream, but a whisper, a reminder. The world outside the prison gates moved differently, faster, lighter, but also unfamiliar. Grass didn't crunch the same. Air didn't carry the weight of tension. And yet Marcus never quite unclenched his fists, even when no one was looking. Freedom came in the shape of open skies and apologies, but none of it filled the cracks. He moved into a small cabin on the edge of a lake. No neighbors, no distractions, just water, trees, and the sound of Zeus's soft breathing at night. It should have felt like peace, but the silence had edges. Every morning, Zeus would sit at the cabin window, eyes fixed on the horizon like he was waiting for something, or someone. Some days Marcus caught himself watching too. Not because he feared danger, but because he knew it hadn't really ended. The man from the prison gates, the one with the familiar smile, he hadn't just disappeared. He had left a question behind, one that gnawed. Who still had control? Zeus was no ordinary K9. That much had become clear. He had remembered, he had defied, he had led an entire team into darkness to pull Marcus out. But even he had reacted to that whistle, and Marcus didn't understand why. He spent hours re-watching the prison tapes Keller had smuggled out, frame by frame, analyzing the movements, the background noise, the man's voice. Nothing matched. It was like watching a ghost walk through reality, but Zeus reacted every time the footage reached that final moment. Ears pricked, muscles tensed, eyes dilated. Recognition, not fear. Loyalty. It terrified Marcus more than anything else, because it meant Zeus had once trusted that man, and trust, that isn't given, it's trained. Marcus poured through Zeus's old files, looking for something, anything. Early assignments, trainers, co-handlers, and then he found it, a single name. Sharrow S., not Samuel Harrow, but S. Harrow, a civilian consultant, contracted during an off-books behavioral pilot 6 years earlier. Specialization: advanced whistle pattern recognition and neuroconditioning in military K9s. No photographs, no follow-ups, just one note in the margin. Subject shows unusually high pattern retention post-conditioning. Recommend Class A debriefing and removal from further exposure. Marcus closed the file. The name wasn't Harrow, it was a code, an alias. He was never supposed to be known, never supposed to exist. But Zeus remembered. He always did. Days turned to weeks. Marcus began therapy, not because he wanted to, but because the DOJ mandated it as part of his exoneration program. He sat through sessions like a soldier on a minefield, never giving more than needed. But one question kept returning. What do you want now? The therapist asked it every session. He never answered, until one day he did. I want to know why, not about his conviction, not about the frame-up, but why Zeus responded. The therapist didn't speak, just wrote something down and passed him a card. A research facility, not government, private, quiet, off the grid. They used to study canine memory and trauma imprinting. They shut down 5 years ago, but some of the staff still keep records. Quietly. The building looked abandoned when Marcus arrived. Vines crept through the cracks. A shattered camera hung loose over the rusted gate. Zeus hesitated before stepping forward, as if memories long buried were stirring. They entered together. The smell of antiseptic still lingered. Old monitors hummed faintly. Files half-burned lay scattered across a metal desk. Then a woman's voice echoed from the back. I always knew he'd come back. Marcus spun. She stepped out slowly. Late 60s, grey braid, thick glasses. Dr. Elise Rourke. Zeus's first trainer. I told them what he was capable of, she said softly. They didn't listen. Or maybe they listened too well. She handed Marcus a folder. Samuel wasn't part of our team. He was embedded. Intelligence, maybe. He said he was testing whistle-based override commands for deep field K9s. Said it was for Black Ops missions, but I knew better. He was testing loyalty fracture points. Marcus opened the folder. Inside, diagrams, training logs, stress response charts, Zeus's name at the top, and one line underlined in red. Test complete. Subject demonstrates split loyalty capability, extreme recall retention. Proceed to deletion. Phase. Marcus's throat tightened. He was supposed to be wiped, he asked. Dr. Rourke nodded. But something stopped them. I think it was you. He bonded. No, she said. He chose. Marcus looked at Zeus. The dog stared back, ears alert. You broke the conditioning, she whispered. No dog has ever done that. He came back to you because love rewired his instincts. But the fear didn't leave Marcus. Then why does he still react to that whistle? Dr. Rourke looked away. Because the brain doesn't forget trauma. It only learns to live alongside it. Even the strongest loyalty carries scars. Marcus left with the folder. And for the first time in months, he understood. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about obedience. It was about memory. Zeus had once known that man, and when the whistle echoed, it didn't command, it reminded. Back at the cabin, Marcus sat on the porch. The sun sank low over the lake, casting a blood-orange hue across the water. Zeus lay beside him, head on his paw, eyes closed. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out the whistle. He had found it tucked inside the training logs, still cold, still intact. He lifted it slowly, paused, then blew. Just once, a sharp, clear tone. Zeus's eyes opened, but he didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at Marcus, as if saying, "I know what that is. But I know who you are more." The whistle fell from Marcus's fingers and broke on the deck. He exhaled deeply. The last shadow in his chest finally faded. Zeus nuzzled his side, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt whole. He didn't need a mission. He didn't need revenge. He just needed to remember one thing. Love rewires everything. The nightmares still came. Some nights he saw the cell, the darkness, the whistle, but they no longer held him, because every time he jolted awake, Zeus was there watching, guarding. And when the sun rose, they walked the woods together in silence, not as prisoner and K9, not as handler and soldier, but as brothers, survivors. Each scar telling a story neither of them would let die. And on one cold morning in October, Marcus carved a small plaque and nailed it to the cabin gate. No words, just two paw prints, one human, one canine, side by side. The wind rustled, the trees swayed, and the world finally felt quiet. But deep in the woods, far beyond the range of sight, a man stood, hands in pockets, watching the cabin through binoculars, the same smile, the same eyes. But this time he didn't raise a whistle. He just turned and walked away, leaving behind only footprints and the faintest sound of a second whistle, one never meant for Zeus, but for something else, something still waiting in the dark. In the